Now let's try it. That's better. So I'm doing this paraphrase of this talk. Either it is or it isn't. And I'm pulling in and I'm looking at the reader board. And I have this thing whenever anybody gets stuck. I said, well, you're stuck in either or consciousness, and it's a both and universe. And there on my reader board, my talk title is an either or. And I'm echoing too. And so it's like all I could do was laugh and say, yeah, even I get caught in either or consciousness with this. So you got the humor, right? We need a laugh track, Michael. So then that leads me into the question, so if it's not just either or, if it is both and, how do we approach God in that way? If either it is all God or it's not, what's the both and with that? It's both all God and not? That's an interesting question to contemplate, isn't it? How can it be both all God and not all God? So thank you very much. I'm going to leave you with that, and that's my talk. No. So we're going to explore that. So the first thing to remember is that God is beyond everything that we could ever think about it. Every idea we have of God is too small. Every idea we have of God is too small. I love the start of the reading. God or Spirit is supreme, infinite, limitless personality. What happens when we start to get into is it either all God or not, is it's our perception. It's our looking at it. It seems to us like either or. But it's not. It is both and. We have our ideas of God. We have our ideas of what it is. We have our ideas of how it should show up, right? We have our ideas of what it does, how it acts. And we say that God is good when it acts in accordance with our belief about good. Notice? Okay? If my football team wins, God is good. If the other person's football team wins, God wasn't there in the game. I'm just teasing. That's a little simplistic. But when it appears to act, this is where we get questions oftentimes in say foundations or from people. It's like, well, if it's all God, then how do you explain this? And they throw out Hitler or Darfur or molested children or something. How do you explain this? And the answer is, really, I don't know, and it's not mine to explain because there's an infinite presence that knows far more than I do what it's doing, and it's not my job to explain it. I can't. You can't. We'll talk about that in a minute. We doubt God when it doesn't show up in the way that we like or think it should. Have you ever had a time in your life when God hasn't shown up the way you think it should, and 5 years down the road you sit there and go, thank God that happened that way? Right? Okay? The relationship, the job we clung to with claws on, digging our way into it, and when we finally get out of it, we look back and say, oh my God, I needed to get out of that years before. Thank God God doesn't work the way that we think it should. Right? It's bigger. It's bigger. God is way beyond our ideas. Ernest says, in the beginning, God. In the beginning, spirit or intelligence only. No manifest universe, no system of planets, no visible form, nothing but the life principle. And that is all we are ever dealing with, is that life principle, beyond our ideas of what it is and how it should be. So then the question becomes for us personally, is God made in my image and likeness? That is, the way that I think it should show up, or not? Am I willing to have a bigger picture? Am I willing to step into that unknownness and say, I don't know. I don't know why this is happening the way that it is. But I do know that it's still all God, and that God is a good that's beyond any comprehension I might have of good. We get challenged with that. We get asked that question sometimes on a daily basis if we're paying attention. So God is either made in our image and likeness or not. You know, sometimes I've talked with some ministers and we talk about, there are certain people who in a church, if you make a change of anything in the service, they sit there and go, but you can't make that change. I want it to, it's always been this way. Yeah, you know, I remember when I was a kid growing up and Vatican II came, as I was in the Catholic Church. And Vatican II came, and all of a sudden the Mass went from being in Latin to being in English. The altar was turned around to where instead of the priest having his back to you, he had his face to you. And a whole lot of people went, "Oh my God, this isn't church anymore," and all this stuff. And so it's referred to as, I want God on my terms. I want church on my terms. And yet we get asked in our lives, am I willing to have my life on God's terms? Am I willing to have life on God's terms? And sometimes that feels like sitting on quicksand, doesn't it? It's kind of a little shifty, a little shaky. And yet quantum physicists tell us that that's exactly how life is. Infinite possibility, wave particle. The chair you're sitting on, a quantum physicist would look at it and say, first of all, it's mostly space. And secondly, it's a probability that it's going to show up, and a high probability that it's going to continue to show up as a chair. But there is a possibility that it's not. And by the way, it's moving. There are instruments that can right now measure the little molecular movement, little photon movements in it. Your chair is actually vibrating. And I don't mean that you have a little vibrator in your chair. I mean it is at the photon level, the subatomic particle level, vibrating and moving. Breathe. By the way, so is your body, so is the ground, so is everything. I didn't hear that. So if we open to it's not made in our image and likeness, we open to an infinite possibility. We open to Ernest Holmes' infinite possibility. We open to a greater willingness then to begin to know truth. So the truth doesn't become a nice pat answer that once we've got it, and it fits in a box, and we can take it out and say, this is what you're supposed to do in all circumstances, because this is the truth. Okay? It becomes instead something we have to work with. And the intellect doesn't like things that are not nice pat answers, does it? Mine doesn't. It likes nice pat answers. It likes things to be a certain way. I joke about the fact that Cynthia and I have recently moved in together. She moved into my house, and I have things in a certain way, and she puts them back in different places, especially in the kitchen. One day I'm used to this, certain things being in this drawer, and suddenly they appear in this drawer because that's where she thinks is a logical place for them. Life is uncertain, shakes me up, and my intellect doesn't like it. So truth, capital T truth, is this dancing, swirling mystery that's in process, if we can really get into it. It's not an answer, it's a process. It's something that's continuously moving. It doesn't fit into our pat answers. And our intellect is uncomfortable with that and can't handle that. What can handle that is our soul, our inner wisdom self. And we access that with our intuition. Reverend Sue in her prayer was just talking about the eyes of love. When we look at life with the eyes of love, we're looking through that intuition, we're looking through the eyes of the divine. And then we have greater access to the truth. And it doesn't have to fit into our neat little package of how God should be. And it is open to multiple possibilities of things happening at the same time. It is open to something bigger than just our way of seeing things and what it should be. It's open to a person can not act the way that we think they should, and we can still hold them in love. Simultaneously. We might not like what they do, but we can hold them in love. Which is how God perceives the world as far as we can tell. So intellect is great for certain things. It's great for logic, it's great for analysis, it's great for comparison, but it doesn't and it can't perceive the infinite. And oftentimes, because of that, it concludes that it's not real. And we have a whole lot of people who say God doesn't exist, right? Because they can't perceive it with the intellect. The Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore has a fabulous poet that says saying that says, the intellect is like a knife blade, or a knife that is all blade. And the hand that uses it gets bloody. If we use it with the intellect, the hand that uses just the intellect. So we need something more to go with that, something to soften it, something to shield against it. And that's the eyes of love. That's the soul perception. That's the intuition. And so we start to practice this. See, the soul lives in that wonderful field that Rumi talks about, where he says, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Breathe that in for a moment. Your soul, my soul, lives in that field, lives there. But how often do we listen to it? And how often do we like to say, but I want it my way? This has to turn out the way that I want it to. Instead of saying, you know what, I am open to how this turns out because I know that there is an infinite presence that is for the good of all at work here. Whenever somebody asks me to pray for them for a job interview, I pray for that person to be in their right work and for the company that they're interviewing with to hire the right person. I don't pray for that person to be in that job because I don't know if that's the right job and if that's the right company. But I do know that if they open to the infinite, they will be moved into the perfect place. When somebody asks me to pray for a relationship, I don't necessarily pray that that relationship that they want with that person they want it with necessarily is the relationship that works out. I pray that both of the people involved in this relationship move into and experience the love that is truly, the full love that is truly theirs. Ideally, it would be great if it was with the person they want it to be with. And if they're both in agreement with that, that's usually what shows up. But I pray for something beyond just how I think it should be. And so can we get outside of our ideas, our intellect ideas, and start to play in that soul? Tagore, the poet Tagore, has another wonderful saying, the water in a vessel is sparkling. The water in the sea is dark. The small truth has words which are clear. The great truth has great silence. The great truth has silence, great silence. Do we spend time in that silence? Do we spend time in that soul communication, in listening to that which is beyond our words, beyond our ideas, beyond our perception, and start to allow that in? So this week I'm going to invite you to do three things, as always. Number one is to take time to experience the divine, to experience the divine. At our next service, we're going to do an actual experiential service of the divine. We're going to interweave music and spoken word and silence and have that all together as a spiritual experience. And Ernest Holmes, I have a reading for the second service that's different than this one. And he starts right off with, we need spiritual experience. In 3 paragraphs, he says that phrase 3 times. We need spiritual experience. You can practically see him sitting there at a podium somewhere thumping his hand going, we need spiritual experience. This is a guy who has said that we are oftentimes overread and underdone. Okay? Overread and underdone. And so take the time this week to experience the divine, not to think about it, not to read about it, but to sit down and open that soul, open those eyes of love, and listen to that deep silence that is the ocean, the deep water of spirit. So that's the first thing I invite you to do this week. The second thing I invite you to do this week is to open to an expanded idea of God. Whatever your idea is, see if you can expand it. See if you can open to something bigger than even that. To just be open. And you say, but what would that be? I don't even know what it is. You're right, you don't. But if you're willing to open up and say, I'm willing to open to a greater idea of God than I have ever before experienced or known or even imagined, if we have that willingness, the universe has a tendency to fill in that willingness. It will make the call that we need to have. It calls us as much as we call it. All we need to do is be open. So this week, open to an expanded idea of God. Does God, and just notice, does God have to be the way I want it to be? How rigid am I with that idea? Can I let God be God today? And look at it and say, wow, let me learn how that is. Let me see what it's doing with open eyes and without a judgment and a preconceived idea of how it should be acting. How far can I stretch my perception? Can I start to expand and stretch? Do this with your body. Just expand. Just get the body involved. Can I expand and stretch a little bit? Take a breath. And just notice, let your cells vibrate at an expanded and stretched level. Just notice if you're in resistance about that. If you're in resistance about that, you're probably in resistance about other things in life. God is bigger than any idea we might have. So that's the second thing we're going to do. Open to an expanded idea. The third thing is to pick an aspect of the divinity to embody. Pick an aspect of God to play as this week. Okay? How can I live as more of God? Not just know about it. How can I live it? How can I be it? How can I be more life? How can I be more love? How can I be more beauty? How can I be more power? How can I be more wisdom? How can I be more creativity? How can I live this aspect of God in greater and greater ways this week? Am I willing to shake up my life a little bit? Am I willing to do things different? Just for the sake of doing things different, to go explore a different aspect of God. Am I willing, if I go for a walk every day, and I go for a walk in the same path or the same direction or the same, circuit, am I willing to go for a walk somewhere else? Am I willing to explore something else of God? Am I willing to have somebody change my drawers around in my kitchen, the contents of the drawers, and be okay with it? Am I willing to set aside a little more time for meditation? Not prayer as in asking for something, but just meditation, listening, contemplating, just opening to the divine. Am I willing to stretch myself this week and play in something different? And so that's the invitation. 3 things. Take time to experience the divine, open to an expanded idea of God, and pick an aspect of the divine to embody. Are you willing to play with that this week?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I like that. I want to close with a quote from Ernest Holmes. We must become as little children. How we long for a return of that simple trust in life which children have. In their minds, there are no doubts. They have not yet been told they are sinners, destitute of divine guidance and spiritual life. The life of the child is lived in natural goodness. God is natural goodness. We must return the way we came. As little children who know that life is good and to be trusted, we are to approach our problems as though they were not. In other words, we're not looking at our problems, we're looking at God. There's a wonderful old phrase that says, instead of telling God how big your problem is, tell your problem how big your God is. Okay? So we look at our problems, he says, as if they were not. Approaching them in this manner, they will vanish. There is a wisdom and power, not of the flesh, which springs perennially from the inner life, all-powerful and all-wise. That energy, that wisdom, that depth lives within you and me. It's there for us. It's like a bank account that is there for us to tap into, and most of us don't bother to go to the bank. So this week, go to the bank. Go to the inner bank. Tap into that inner wisdom. Tap into that deep sense. Find out that it's way bigger than you ever thought. I remember the movie Harry Potter when he first gets started, and he's supposed to go to this wizarding school, and he goes, how am I supposed to afford this? And they take him to this bank vault that his parents had left, and there's way more money than he knows what to do with. Okay? We have a bank vault that's like that. That the Father, Mother, Divine God, the infinite personality of the universe has left for us. Tap into it. Let's move into prayer. And so I know, God, I know, that there is that infinite presence. There is that infinite presence. Far beyond my idea of knowing what it is. Far beyond my conception of it. And I'm grateful for that. Because if God was only the way that I conceived it, what a limited God. So I'm grateful for that idea, for that consciousness, that awareness, that God not only either is or isn't, but it's both is and isn't simultaneously. It is and isn't what I think it is. It is beyond all that. It is the love that is beyond my idea of love. It is the good that is beyond my idea of good. It is the wisdom and the creativity that's beyond my idea and my own limited perception of wisdom and creativity. And I know that because that God is all that there is, that we are one of it. We have to be one of it. There's nowhere else to be. God is an infinite presence, whose center is everywhere, whose circumference is nowhere. We are that. We are each centers of this divine. And so I speak my word that this week each of us does go deeper into our experience of the divine. That we open up this deep bank account, this deep account within us, this deep awareness within us of what that God is, and we allow ourselves to move into that awareness. We allow ourselves to move into that experience and that expression. We recognize with Ernest Holmes that if we knew that if we had that sense of communion, that spontaneous sense of the irresistible union, that we would manifest immediately. We would demonstrate immediately all that was necessary for our lives. When Jesus says, seek ye first the kingdom of God within, the kingdom of heaven within, he is talking about this. We go within first. And so we take our focus off the outer and move to that center of our being. We allow our soul, our inner wisdom, our intuition, our eyes of love to do that connecting. We let the intellect rest for a little while. We use it where it needs to be used wisely, and then we let it rest. And so I know that as each of us does that this week, we move into a greater and greater experience of love, of joy, of good, of life, of beauty, of the wholeness of who we truly are. And so for this I am grateful, for each person who is saying yes to this, for each person who does this practice, who goes deeper into the divine. I am ever so grateful. Because as any of us goes deeper, all of us goes deeper. This blesses the whole world. And so for that willingness, for the yes that we have within us, I am ever so grateful. And for the universe, that spirit which responds right back with a yes, I am also ever so grateful. And so I release these words into a law that moves them into form and experience, knowing that they're already so. They're already done. Because this is the truth of who we already are. And we are already waking up to this truth. And all we need to do today is say yes to this awakening. And it is done. And it is so. And together we say, and so it is. Thank you.
To love, serve.